Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are reviewing Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Harrison Ford's last outing as the iconic adventure character. This film has been getting a lot of mixed reviews across the board, and it's heartbreaking to say, but they are very justified. This was a big letdown for me personally. As someone who didn't quite grow up in the era of the films, but was still introduced to them as a kid and still loved them as a kid, including the Crystal Skull. I was 10 when the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. I loved it then. I rewatched it the other day. I still really enjoy it. I don't understand half the hate that that film gets. The argument that it jumps the shark in terms of its broader mythology and plot is kind of ridiculous to me when you consider the grand scheme of all the Indiana Jones plot lines. It had some of the best action of all the Indy films. It had some great characters. I don't understand the hate for Mark Williams. I thought there was some great banter in the film. And apart from the kind of shoddy CGI in places and the Tarzan scene and the weird kind of oversaturated gloss that the film has, I think it's a perfectly fine installment of Indiana Jones. And especially when you compare it to Dial of Destiny, I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull will be redeemed slightly in people's eyes. I do think Dial of Destiny is probably the worst film in the franchise, just by a mile. And the main reason for that is that it just feels boring. And to call an adventure film boring, let alone the most iconic adventure film franchise boring, is just heartbreaking to have to do. The focus of the plot has been very divisive, the third act's been very divisive, but that could have been a very, very exciting possibility. For the direction of this installment, I think it could have had a lot of thematic undertones relating to Indiana Jones's own life, and yet it just mostly falls flat along the way. I think part of the problem is that the film just has such a great opening set piece. The first 20 minutes of the film, I was on board. It was a kind of rollicking ride. It perfectly combined everything that makes Indiana Jones great, which was merging history with a bit of fiction and fantasy, some great action and great heroics from our titular character, and also just some great interactions between characters. That first kind of set piece with the de-aged Indy, which looks fantastic in some moments and a bit questionable in others, was a really great way to introduce the film. Unfortunately, the rest of the narrative just cannot quite match that. At 2.5 hours long, the film drags. It does drag to the point where I think the pace is a bit all over the place. At 2.5 hours, I don't think this film justifies it. The way the plot meanders around different parts of the globe while they're pursuing whatchamacallits and thingamajigs, it never quite picks up any momentum. So for large parts of the film, I think the pace is just kind of stalled and there's never really any fun urgency to it. I do not think Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Harrison Ford had the kind of chemistry that they needed to sell the dynamic of this film. I don't think it kind of lived up to the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf in the fourth one, or in Harrison Ford and Ke Huy Quan in Temple of Doom. I don't think they were kind of very well matched together. The characters are polar opposites, and I think while that could have made for a very interesting, fun back and forth, it never really convinces you or entertains you enough. And because Harrison Ford is pushing it now with age, a lot of the kind of physical stuff falls to Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character Helena to do. You're just not as engaged. It's an indie film. The only character you really care about doing cool things is Indiana Jones, and I don't think this film makes enough of a case for Helena Shaw being a great character, let alone a surrogate replacement for Indiana Jones. Indy does feel kind of sidelined in this film. He's at the forefront of all the emotional beats, but when the action comes around, obviously he's not as involved in that anymore. And when the film is utilising CGI more than practical effects, it just doesn't quite have that same feel to it. Now, there were a couple of compelling emotional beats in this film. Those quieter moments of reflection and retrospection where Indy is kind of submitting to his age and the restrictions of being old, or talking about things that have happened in the past, kind of confirming what's happened to Mark Williams or his marriage with Marion. Those moments kind of hit home and feel like they needed room to breathe and kind of needed more focus, because they are sort of brushed under the rug as quickly as they appear, which is a shame because Harrison Ford really excels in those quieter moments. And it lends the film an emotional depth that could have been tapped into a hell of a lot more, and I think could have made the subtext of this film work more with the literal plot. John Rhys-Davies coming back as Sulla, completely underused. He's in it for like a couple of very brief scenes, and that the magic is recaptured for those couple of scenes, but not to the point where you're like, yep, that was an acceptable amount of screen time. You wish he was there for more. But the film would rather spend time with new characters who you don't care about, you still don't care about by the end. Antonio Banderas, completely wasted. And then the new characters who are Phoebe Waller-Bridge and a new kid who's, I suppose, supposed to be a kind of short round 2.0, they just don't land with any lasting impact. Villains, Mads Mikkelsen is okay. His motives are okay. I don't think any of the villains have really had a kind of lasting impact. They're either just power-hungry archaeologists, satanic, cult leaders, or Russians with wacky haircuts. So to call Mads Mikkelsen a bit forgettable, I don't think is damning to the franchise. I don't think any of the Indy villains are particularly well written or particularly memorable. And Mads does as best a job he can. This film is just a dud, John Williams' music is fantastic, but Indy doesn't get enough heroic moments for that classic score to feel triumphant enough. And I think for a film as daring as this film, and it goes to some incredibly far-flung places, to feel myself just be indifferent to that and just not thrilled by that speaks volumes to, how flat this film falls. It is another classic franchise that just seems to be limping over the finish line. So I don't really want to say much more. I'm disappointed enough. But if you guys have seen it, do drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's always a huge help for me, guys. And in the meantime, we'll see you for the next vid.